Welcome to the Cockney Guide to Enlightenment podcast. My name's Stephen Rosen, and in this podcast we go beneath the surface of people's lives to find out what makes them tick. My own life I wrote about in this book, Lost in the Babylon. It's through childhood adversity, organised crime and a successful life as a businessman in the city. When I talk to people, we go beneath the surface of where they got to in their lives and we find out what really makes them tick. So if you want to follow me, connect to me with social media at Cockney Profit. And if you enjoy this podcast, please like it, subscribe or follow us and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Cockney Guide to Enlightenment podcast with myself, Stephen Rosen, and my guest today is Robert Callender. How are you feeling, Rob?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for inviting me down. It's an honour to be here. Feel a little bit anxious, a little bit, which is healthy. It's a healthy anxiousness. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to, giving you a bit more of an insight on my journey in, recovery and ADHD.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Robert. And I've known Robert for many years, and we go back, but I was saying as we was having a coffee earlier, back to the days of the Wild West, really, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When we lived as outlaws, and I'm not going to, take you right back to all of that stuff, but, basically the reason I wanted to get you on the podcast is obviously I know you well, I've seen your journey through change and through your own evolving into the person that you are, and also the ADHD stuff that we're going to talk about that is really important, but that's kind of just another level on top of the addiction stuff that you dealt with, and how someone takes that into a business and kind of does really well in a business, which we'll hopefully talk about as well. But just basically, I just think your journey's really valuable, really interesting. And, maybe we can go back to wherever you want to go back to, your kind of circumstances of growing up. I know you grew up in the East End and it was a lively place, wasn't it? I've recently, just to give you some kind of stuff about what's going on, kind of what's live for me at the moment, is I'm kind of really aware of generational conditioning. So this is the stuff that not only was passed to me from my parents, their level of what, their conditioning was passed down, but what I passed to my daughter and my son and everyone else, so I'm kind of really, that's been alive for me recently. And I was talking to my mum yesterday. I went round for dinner. She's 91.
Wow.
And we got on the subject of trauma. I mean, she's quite with it. But she grew up, she was a child in the war, and they was getting bombed in London, I'm sure, like your parents and many others of that generation. And I was talking about trauma. And I was telling her about my dad's trauma. My dad, before he died in his late 80s, kind of explained a scene to me of him with his father at the time. He was a market trader, his father, and they'd been over to Woolwich to a market. They was heading back to the other side of the water. And basically what he said was, the sirens went off, they had to go and get shelter somewhere. I can't remember where they sheltered, but they sheltered somewhere overnight virtually. And he said, we come out in the morning and there was fires everywhere, there was buildings blown up, there was just glass in the street, there was everything. Just a scene of devastation, a scene of war, really. And then, as my dad's telling me this story, he said a double-decker bus come along, a red bus, just come through the midst of all of this chaos. And so him and his dad got on the bus, and as his dad went to pay the money, the bus conductor went, no, it's okay. But what happened at that point, as my dad got to that point in the story, he just started welling up, and I could see that trauma was in him, and he'd never really spoke about it, but it was there, for 80 plus years or whatever it was. And I was relaying this to my mum, and she was like, well, I never had any trauma. you know. And I just thought, in a way, it's lovely that she's never had to go there and it's never affected her. And kind of I was saying, well, we did, you know, from our parents, you and Dad, you know. And she went, we all seemed okay, you know. Absolutely. So it was like, so it was nice in a way for me to kind of just honour her journey in life and the fact that she's gone through that life and she's not had to visit that stuff, or she's not had to even acknowledge it. And I know from memory we can repaint pictures and we can repaint memories, and you know, so I don't even know how I've gone into this, but I was just kind of fascinated by this generational trauma that can get passed down, and it becomes so normal, you know. So you know, going back to my sort of question of where to start on this podcast is, you know, I'm sure your family, you know, coming from that environment, and we grew up in, you know, within the same sort of postcode, I suppose, and just, you know, how have you started to get away from that in your life? And I know I've jumped sort of like 3/4 into the podcast there, but you know, what I'm saying is that I know that this stuff is really is embedded in people, and I'm sure that, you know, as part of your journey, you've had to look at your stuff and find it and try not to pass that on to your own kids, and you know, I mean, it's just an interesting place, and I wasn't intending to start here really, but you know, Robert, how does that sit with you? What is that?
Well, thank you very much. I think that was quite powerful, just the way you sort of went into the story about, you know, seeing Mum yesterday and tethering back to Dad's story and the war, and you know, it's quite powerful. I mean, you know, the trauma, and you know, it's amazing. You know, we've got some amazing stories. Excuse me. And I mean, going back to my childhood, I mean, I came down to London from Scotland, a very large family, to the East End, and I was the youngest of 7, and it was pretty wild. It was a wild household, you know. There was a lot of love, but there was a lot of dysfunctional chaos. We had alcohol parents, and come weekend we was let to run wild and do our own thing, and that extended into the week sometimes, because their alcoholism went on, or their drinking went on, and trauma. I mean, sadly, I say there was a lot of love, and there was a lot of love, but there was also a lot of violence. You know, there was a lot of belts and smacks and beating up, and God rest my brother, he's not here today. He died of cancer, but he used to get the broom broke across his back. I mean, just fucking, excuse my language, but terrible, shocking when you think. And that's not my experience today, you know. And as you said, like, you know, moving on and changing, you know, but getting brought up in that environment, getting brought up in a quite a hostile Scotch family. But as I say, there was a lot of love, and it was mad as it was. There was a lot within the family. We kind of really, you know, was mad and chaos. But outside, no one could penetrate us. You know, we wouldn't let anyone else.
In that scenario, I mean, what I picture and what I kind of understand is, you know, in all of that dysfunction, there's that kind of bond, and you say, you know, there's a lot of love, and there's a lot of, like, really, you know, you've got each other's backs in that, even though it's chaos.
Absolutely.
And it's a difficult picture to describe, but yeah, I think.
And on that, I mean, there's the going out. I mean, there was, you know, like a lot of different cultures. There was a lot of, you know, a little bit of racism there. You know, coming from Scotland down to London, you know, Scots this, whatever. But you just marched on and got on with it. And equally, we were racist to others, sadly. That's what happened. Yeah. And not proud of that. That's what happened. But thankfully, you know, I grew up, moved on, and I've got many friends from many nationalities, you know, from Pakistani to Jamaican to African to Irish, to, you know, and I'm pleased about that. But sadly, there was a lot, you know, growing up, just trying to find yourself. in that madness, But I was a very lively kid. I was full on. I was like, and sadly I was removed from school very young. I didn't have any schooling. 11 years old, Dainford School in Bethnal Green, which
I used to go to Dainford.
Yeah, there were some characters there, as you would know, and 11 years old, 6 months in. I loved school as well. Really loved, the whole setup. But I was removed because I was uncontrollable. I did, I sort of, it doesn't matter. I was sort of livened as a teacher up and was told I've got to be removed from school. But then there were special schools, and eventually I was put in care, which was heartbreaking for my mum, because none of the kids were put in care, and that was something we just didn't do, or wasn't, and I was taken away, but very temporarily. It was like for 5 minutes, and I kept running away, and eventually they said, well, okay, we'll let you. You look after him, but it's got to be conditions. And sadly, I was just allowed to do my own thing. So as a young kid, I navigated the streets of London and became my own teacher. And I learned a lot from the West End. I was up the West End very young with a little gang of kids, and and getting up to no good, and doing lots of things that kids do. Regardless if they're in the countryside, the city, wherever they may be, kids are kids. And the more we was let loose to be able to do our own thing, we become more wilder. And within that, there was obviously, drug taking. And nothing was too heavy, but a bit of alcoholism, a little bit of, drinking. And slowly, I grew up very quick. So a young teenager, at 13, 14, I was hanging out with big men at 21, 25, and, thinking I want to be like them.
Yeah, and that's just such a fast track, isn't it? And I identify with all of it because I was on the same trajectory, slightly different circumstances, family-wise, but I mean, just to drop that conditional kind of conditioning from environment, from family. By 11 years old, you was a product of what you'd come from, really, and obviously, and then it's in survival mode, isn't it? From the get go. I imagine even from much younger, you're in survival mode. I know I was in survival mode, and it's just. I mean, we'll come to that moving away from that stuff and doing the work on that stuff. But I just wanted to acknowledge that from very early on, life circumstances have created a set of conditions of which you've reacted to, and in your, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but from looking from the outside. A set of circumstances of which we have to learn to survive, and I think for me it was much the same. I went out and looked for what I needed on the streets. As you say, with much older people around you as well. So and what I didn't know at the time was I had ADHD, so I was a live wire, so I had a lot of energy. It probably wasn't even...
No, they weren't even aware of it back then. But, and they couldn't, I was like the roadrunner. They just couldn't stop me. I was on, in everything I did. I was just like 100 miles an hour. And even myself, sometimes I couldn't even cope with my own energy and mindset. My mind was racing, constantly wanting to do things, and had ideas and dreams. And it was great, but it was also confusing. But going back to what you said about the survival mode, the 1 to 10, the fight or flight, many fight or flights. And, and I loved, my young years, as mad as it was and as chaos as it was, I loved it. It was great. It was adventurous. It suited my ADHD. Now I know, why I loved it, because, and there was a lot of trauma, but you know what? I created some great coping strategies to deal with that. And, the journey was exciting. I love excitement. I love, that living on the edge. Or I did love living on the edge. I loved the excitement. And that's what a lot of it was about. And it fed the ADHD, which at the time I didn't know. And, my endorphins were up high, and so as I say, partying, going out and just, driving from very young. I was driving a car at 15. License, no insurance, and just crazy. That's what we did. That's what happened. We was the law of our own. It was like, it didn't matter, as long as you bought it, you had it, it was yours. Or sometimes it was someone else's with different number plates.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
The Wild West.
Yeah, the Wild West, and the
Wild East End. Really.
Yeah. But and just kind of, I had lots of amazing dreams. I really, as a kid. I'll never forget, I was very into inventing. I always had these ideas I was going to invent something. And, I had a massive excitement. I used to really enjoy, going out. And every day I'd get up with a spring. It was never like, and the idea of like, being suppressed was like, I just couldn't cope with that. I needed to, I was a free spirit, and I was, for better or worse, I was allowed to be a free spirit from the household I came from. And, looking back, I think that was a little bit sad to some level because, it was dangerous, and it got me in a lot of trouble as well with the law. I started getting, into trouble with the police, and then there was, institutions that followed.
And unfortunately, I mean, just as an observation of that stuff, it was like, in that area, in that way of life, it wasn't anything that was unusual, was it?
No,
I mean,
it was a norm.
Like, it was
normal.
par for the course, wasn't it?
So, it was normal. I mean, sadly, you had to go through that system. Had you not gone through that system, you was a bit of an outcast.
Yeah.
It's like, think of that today. It's like,
I can remember,
DC, your Borstalls and your Wandsworths and Brixtons and all the various places. It's like, if you didn't experience that, you weren't really cutting it like with the rest of the guys. It's like, sad to think that.
Yeah.
But, and with that, there was obviously experimenting within, various drugs and substances and alcohol and, and then it was like, kind of, wow. It was like, now the journey really started. That kind of like, getting really into, speed. I mean, I never forget speed as a young kid. It was like, I was fast enough as it was, let alone having anything else to excel me more further up. And that was like 3-day turnouts, completely up for 3 days.
Is there any sense of like you was self-medicating there or was that just part of the adventure? Because I went down that route.
Yeah,
as well.
I mean, absolutely. I think it was certainly part of the adventure, self-medicating. It was just like getting high, just wanted to get higher. Wanted to, that's what was going on. People was doing different bits and pieces at the time and, experimenting with different substances. And you went with it, you got involved, you went with it, again up the West End, going in like, clubs at like 14, 15, going in clubs. How on earth got in there, but we got in there, we knew the older lot that would get us in. And, just the West End was like the playground. I loved the whole bright lights, bright city, the whole buzz of it. It really fitted for, again, I'll reflect, keep going back to ADHD because it really did. It kind of, kept me sort of really, wow.
Engaged.
Yeah, the endorphins were up, yeah. It was like, boom. And also in life, because obviously there's a lot of stuff up there, there's a lot of like advertising, visual stuff, and I'm very visual, and it was like, wow. Coming from Bethnal Green, there wasn't a lot of real visual stuff back in the sort of like early 70s. It was like, it was quite bleak. The West End was alive, it was fire, it was light, it was music, it was buzzing, it was like, whoa. So yeah, and from that, I used to do little jobs. I was always grafting, so I'd do a bit of fly pitching down Leather Lane, Brick Lane. I had a little job down there.
Yeah.
I used to sell jewellery for a guy I never forget, God rest him, he's not with us any longer. He was like a father figure to me, John Kasabi. Really interesting. So I was selling jewellery and down out in gardens as a young kid. You know, always out sort of moving around trying to do a deal, make things happen. So I was all very...
So you was always like an entrepreneur as
Yeah.
well, along with that, which
Absolutely,
obviously
yeah.
is progressed in your life. But
Yeah, absolutely. So I was always getting that, trying to, again, that creative mindset.
Yeah.
I was always trying to make things happen or talk about ideas, and some people thought, what is he talking about? But I was always having a go. I'd never just roll over and say, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. It's just, I was a talker, you know, I'd get out there and make things happen. And so, and then, you know, the fruit and veg market used to be down Spitalfields Market, creating all sorts of problems for them, you know, nicking their milk floats. Driving them back to Bethnal Green, the old milk floats. That was another mad turn out as kids, you know, it was quite fun.
when we was around the flats, you know, down the boundary, we used to go down there and open up the backs of, the lorries was just covered, they wasn't even closed in at the time.
Yeah.
Taking whatever you needed, fruit-wise.
But, you know what, going back, I mean, it was, you know, it was unhealthy for young kids to be running around the way we were, but it was great fun.
And I think that kind of, I mean, if you look at, you know, how you've brought your family up, you know, you'd be horrified.
Absolutely. You just would be horrified, absolutely, as you say. But, you know, going back, it was amazing. It was like real fun and adventurous and, you know, being able to just like mill around, do what you wanted. And you know, probably there wasn't great fun for some of the people we sort of... you know, disturbed.
There's always leave a wake of destruction
left
from
behind.
that type of behaviour and that type of trajectory of life, for sure.
But and life sort of slowly developed. I started coming into a young man who not quite sure knew where he was going, what he was doing, and my schooling was kind of left by the wayside, and I just became this kind of I suppose, sadly, a criminal career.
Career criminal.
Career criminal. And, you know, not that I'm proud of that. That is what it is. And I thought, well, okay, well, let's grab it with both hands. And I got...
I mean, just to reflect on that, I kind of went down that same route. And it seemed that, you know, that would probably, on the careers spectrum of kids who come from where we come from, you know, that would have been an option.
Yeah.
That would have been an option, and that would have been something that was, you know, like going to work in the city or something.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, for different people, you know, that
Absolutely.
would have been the path that...
I mean, the pub, as you would know, was the office. You know, you met in the pub, you had a trade, you did whatever you did. You know, you exchanged bits and pieces, and, you know, anyone was in the pub, and it was the office, and you kind of navigated out from that point. And there was a place I'll never forget in just opposite Lane, Christchurch. I don't even know Christchurch, beautiful big church there, just opposite the new Spitalfields Market. And there used to be a place there called the August. So it was a venture playground. Yeah. And it was like Fagan's Den. Yeah. You'd have, you know, Petticoat Lane was across the road, and you'd have all your pickpocketers and all your people out getting up to whatever they got up to, and they'd come back there with all the goodies. And then we'd be playing cards, we'd be playing pool. There was some proper characters come out of that place. And it was some place, I mean, just, you know, again, the guy who ran it was a little bit of a, you know, character. But yeah, we was able to go there and I went to school, I had a special school within that. And I went to the special school. It's mad to think, you know, it was like Fagan's Den. I went to the little prefab in the back of the eventual playground, and there used to be a teacher who used to come there, I think, twice a week or something. I should go in there to be taught. Yeah. And yet the other side...
It's like the equivalent of work experience today for the kids.
It's crazy. Yeah. It's absolute crazy when I think about it. But, so as I sort of started developing into this character, I started... You know, hanging out, as I previously said, there was a lot of older people I should hang out with. So I then thought I was a lot older than I actually was when I was a young teenager. Yeah. And I built a bit of a character. I built this persona and this character up. And and got into some naughty stuff as well.
Was you aware, because this is really interesting stuff, and I'm writing about this as I'm unpacking the personas that I built in my life in this book that I'm writing now. Was you, I mean, I know you said there was a lot of coping strategies of you know, how you lived. Was you aware of building that persona? Was you conscious of it, or was it
not at all.
Just
not
the
at all.
path that you
Not at all.
needed
I was reckless.
to go to?
I was reckless.
Yeah.
I thought I was clever and smart and calculating at certain levels, but I wasn't. I was quite reckless in. I'd very much put out that I knew what I was doing. If we was having a conversation, I'd go, yeah, I've got that covered. I know. I haven't got a clue.
Yeah.
So, you know, I just kind of, I was very, I don't know, lucky, but I was very lucky in some of my approaches because I had some near-death experiences. And, you know, when I think back, it's like, wow, you know, how you got away with that, how you managed to get through there. And you know, and just, you know, I was completely unaware. You know, there was not much consciousness at all going on. You know, I was, you know, but as I started growing, the you know, obviously the change in the patterns of behaviour in the criminality, the drugs, the life started changing, and I had to take a bit more responsibility for my behaviour. So I was starting to become a little bit more sort of thinking I was a little bit more of a Jack the Lad, you know, a bit more like, you know, I've got something about me now. And yet it was like...
And once again, did that come from an ability within yourself, or was that another external when you're looking up at people who are a little bit further on, who seem to have it together, who are behaving a little bit differently now?
Well, there was that, obviously looking at some of the role models, but there was also, I was the youngest of 7 and my brother was a little bit of a handful as a fighter. So I had to sort of keep myself a little bit up, and then being in and out of a few institutions by now, you've got to look after yourself in there. So you got to step up. So I had to step up, and, you know, where we come from, you know, the streets, you know, you've got to look after yourself.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
If you don't know how to look after yourself, you don't get on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and unfortunately, you do. You know, I did some horrible things to people, and I'm not proud of it. You know, not one bit am I proud of it. You know, it had to be a little bit nasty sometimes, and you know that goes with the territory of, you know, criminality and drugs and you know, the West End and the East End, you know, just the gangs. I was in a few gangs where there was, you know, I remember, like, from your side, you had Oxton, Bethnal Green and the Roman, there would be different, like, fights going on. You know?
Yeah, always.
I remember Hackney Road. I remember back in the day, Hackney Road was, you know, an unbelievable place. People from all over London used to come down to just party. We had all the various pubs down there, and, you know, and there was always fights, and it was always going off, wasn't it?
A lot of, I suppose, you know, for an American sort of Hollywood term, turf wars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You'd meet different firms.
It's crazy to think we was across the road from each other, but yeah, we'd have like mad tear-ups, you know, with each other, little gangs. But as soon as the drugs came in, that changed.
Neutralised it.
Yeah.
There was a lot more collaboration.
Yeah, there was more, well, we need to get on here because we need to, who's got what and who hasn't got what, you know?
Yeah, for sure. One of the very few positives of the...
Sadly,
stuff,
brought a bit of a you know, a sense of community.
Calmed us all the fuck down a bit.
Slowed us well down, didn't it? Yeah. So, yeah, just going on. And then I sort of stepped into, if I look back here now, you know, I stepped more into a kind of a business-minded young hood. You know, I was kind of like about making money. Yeah. Money was like a drug. You know, I love money and I like to make money. And I certainly got that from very young. But as I started becoming a bit older, you know, late teens, it was like, you know, I had plans and aims and goals that I wanted to make loads of money. I think we all did.
I think that was like everyone everywhere, you know, just we was obviously equipped with different tools and different ways and means, but everyone, I think, wants to get on, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a real external value, isn't it, of success, you know. So,
and then sort of like with that, trying to sort of like create this career, but again, I was doing certain jobs, so I'd put down the criminality when I was nearly getting nicked. I'd put it down and start doing some work. because I was nearly just getting arrested. So I'd go back and just do mundane, dead-end jobs just to keep above water. That's before the madness of the drugs really took hold. And then as the drugs took hold, it got the mundane jobs were no longer. It was like, I was now full on.
Yeah.
And I was in that circle of, vicious circle of, it was live for today, get as high as I can for today, and using various substances to do that, getting high, getting low.
That whole just circular,
but
getting nowhere, but putting a lot of energy into
putting a massive amount of energy and going nowhere. It was like a hamster wheel, completely just going around in circles and just going backwards constantly, 2 steps forward, 4 back. But then, sadly, I hit a point at 21 and I was got in a lot of trouble and was jailed, and I applied to go to a rehab, and I went to a rehab in Oxfordshire. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I learned stuff there. I was there for 12 months. It was a concept house. And I learned I learned to grow up, I suppose. I learned to grow up. I learned vocabulary I didn't even know. Again, because I had no schooling. I didn't, there was no, and their setup there was quite powerful. It was like, if anyone knows a concept house, their strategy was to strip you back and rebuild you, which is quite damaging today. If you think about it today, it's quite damaging. But for me, it was okay because I was a live wire, and I could deal with that and cope with that because I needed that. I needed to be. And
I mean, I didn't go through a place like that, but in my journey of finding me, of kind of, I had to get rid of everything that didn't work, and that was most things, because my mechanisms and systems of coping and everything all of that stuff was the gear that was killing me as well. So it makes sense that it would have been beneficial for you.
It was very powerful, and I learned how to live. Supposedly normal, I learned how to enjoy the simple things in life. I fell in love with the countryside. I fell in love with, it was very kind of as mad as the place was. It's like coming from a mad family in some respect. It was a mad setup there. We had people from all over the country, and yet we was like stripped back to this raw kind of vulnerability of breaking down and talking about how you feel. And it was the first time that I was made aware it helps if you talk about how you feel. I was like, you talk about how you feel? You're joking. We don't talk about how we feel. We do things. We don't talk about how we feel. I was very physical, doing stuff, not, So, and just coming to the place of, actually talking about how I felt was quite powerful. And it was like, wow. And the start of the journey in self-discovery.
So you recognised that how useful
absolutely
that was.
Amazing. And it was like I found a new family. It was really loving as well there. It was a lot of, it was male-female, so there was a couple of situations happened that it shouldn't have happened, and I got excluded, and very powerful. You have a thing that's called contract. So if you break the contract, you go on contract. And that is like, you're in overalls and you start work at 6 a.m. and you finish at 10 p.m. and they've got you working all day. You have 3 breaks, and the contracts work differently. So if you're an extrovert, they'll have you not talking all day. You're not allowed to talk. And if you're an introvert, they want you talking all day. So it's very powerful. I mean, it's quite damaging as well, but it was, and they break you down. They know how to break you down. They broke me down. I was not giving in. And I give it, and eventually I broke down, and and there was some powerful stuff. There was shifting. I started finding out about myself. I started understanding. I was stubborn, and I didn't give in easy. Very powerful, very, very powerful. I'll never forget that place. It gave me the start of the journey of recovery.
When you started getting that awareness of like, your stubbornness and not giving in, and I mean, that's really interesting for someone at that age to start recognising that, you know, these things maybe are not your best attributes, but they would have served you earlier on.
Absolutely, it served me out in that world I lived in,
Yeah.
the kind of the Wild West. But here now in the kind of normal world, it was like, you know, and just getting vulnerable was like so alien. The thought of like letting people know how I really felt was, you know, the vulnerability, the fear, the judgment, but it was a very strong place. There was a good, strong safety net there, and you know they did a lot of different groups and therapies, but yeah. So I kind of went through that, and sadly, I went through 12 months, and I came out and lived in Oxford for nearly, I think, 4 or 5 years, and it was a wonderful experience living in the country. But their philosophy was it's okay to drink. So I was drinking, and you know I had a party in Oxford. It was great for like 4 years, and eventually I picked up other substances and ended up back in town, London. But so
Was the practice? I mean, when you was, it's really interesting that you picked up some new skills. You got access to new, you know, finding out new parts of yourself and parts that don't work, and you drinking as well alongside that. Are you still trying to practice that stuff with the drinking, or did the drinking just kind of wash that away?
No, it was fine for a bit. I mean, it was. When you say practice that stuff, you're talking about the.
Well, yeah, you know, when you become aware that you're stubborn, and then so I assume that when you become aware that you're stubborn, then you're aware of, like, you know, when am I being stubborn there? So, you know, am I in control? And
yeah, so I think I had a vulnerability about me still, because it was like a new lease of life. It was beautiful. It's coming from like the streets of London to here, living in like Oxford. It was like, wow, it's beautiful. And so I had a fresh. So something I've had the ability to be able to go to a place of vulnerability and allow myself to really be me, and not put that front up and try to be someone who I was trying to be before. And it was wonderful. But sadly, with the, I have a disease, and I believe it's a disease. With that disease, I will go right back to, wanting more. It's never enough. And then that armour comes back up, that, stubbornness.
That's what I was getting at, them parts when they just start creeping back in.
Yeah, absolutely. But certainly for some times, it was like, there were some really good times where...
So you got a bit of a reprieve where you started to learn about who Robert was.
And, just enjoying certain things like, the countryside and, different things in life, away from that kind of... madness from London.
I mean, it's interesting that, nature for me was a big waking up of just connection. Really.
Which has been in touch with Mother Nature. It's just, the whole kind of like walking and, talking and just doing some, hiking and just beautiful. But sadly, I ended up, something I haven't mentioned, from very young, I travelled a lot as well. I was always running away and just trying to get away from situations, and I'd go off to different parts of Europe, and then it was Southeast Asia and, America, South America, and just love travelling. There's a real kind of nomad within me, quite spiritual, and discovered as well within that early start of the journey with the rehab that I'm quite a sort of spiritual guy. I'm a very loving, caring guy.
Yeah.
I didn't really see that loving, caring guy when I was in the Wild West, shall we call it? just getting brought up as a kid. It was like, as I started then finding out about who Rob is, it was like, wow, I ain't a bad guy. I'm actually an okay guy.
Yeah.
And, and I also started loving myself and, giving myself permission that, you're okay. I had some
that's a journey in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
What was the mechanism of that journey?
Well, there were some powerful stories from the authorities and different people, like, you're this, you're that, and you'll never make nothing, and you're putting away, do this, do that, and, you're no good, whatever, and these can kind of stick. They can have that impact on you,
Okay.
that can have that impact on you where you start believing some of that stuff, and it's
So
like
you start listening once again, conditioning that
yeah,
narrative that's coming in.
yeah.
That kind of
But so going back to you know, the Oxford days and then going back into the madness, you know, I kind of went through probably 10 rehabs. I went through 10 rehabs. But it was all pretty much controlled drinking rehabs.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to let go. I didn't want to surrender. I didn't want to stop drinking, because drinking was a major part of who I was. You know, as I said, the office back in the days, and I still had all that old social support network back in town, and you know, and just the thought of what would I do? I would, you know, I was just lost. It was like losing my limbs. It was like, no way. So I mean, I'll go more into it in a bit. That where the change really happened for me.
Yeah, I think that's
you know.
yeah.
But some I learned again going in and out of these rehabs. It was an amazing journey because I learned so much more about who I am, what I like, what I don't like, and why am I still using? Why am I still keep picking up? And then discovered that alcohol was probably one of the worst drugs of all for me.
For you, yeah.
You know, and it was a no-go, and I had to stop.
Yeah, so I mean it's quite often we find out that, you know, them type of drugs like alcohol just keep perpetuating stuff along. But eventually, obviously, you did come to that conclusion, and you come to a place of stopping, and I think you went to Ibiza, did you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I ended up in madly. I went off to Ibiza with a rucksack and a push bike. I had some friends out there, and I went out for, you know, a holiday, but I was going out to tidy up, clean up a bit, and was a bit of a crazy place to go and clean up. I ended up worse out there than before I left. But when I came back, I was met at the airport and by a family member and some friends to be told my mum had passed away a week before. So they waited for me to get back to tell me they couldn't contact me. I was uncontactable. We didn't have phones them days. So, you know, it was no way of getting hold of me. And when I was told, the first thing I thought of, I've got to stop drinking. You know, that's it. I've got to stop drinking. Easier said than done. So, you know, it took me a month to get clean. And that was the 23rd of October 1995. And that would be October, 29 years. Which has been an amazing journey.
Yeah.
In that 29 years, from that point at that airport, realising I've got to stop drinking.
Yeah.
To now.
And it's a pivotal sort of point, isn't it? The realisation, but then the actual stopping and...
Absolutely.
And you know, without... I mean, it's a journey in itself, isn't it? Just getting to that point of really surrendering and with you know, with the baggage that you bring to that, it really has to be a quite a painful, you know, really difficult place to get to in life before you can actually just stop. And then, you know, it's like going back to that earlier rehab that you was in for a year or so, you know, unpacking all the stuff that doesn't work again, because you would have obviously got a lot of knowledge on the way, and you would have picked up, you know, some tools that maybe, you might have repurposed, you might have kind of used to a certain extent and then stop using because the lifestyle keeps taking over. But when you get to a point of actually knowing that, you know, you're done, and then that's when the work really begins, I think, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it was really, I mean, I had quite an experience when I lost my mum. She was a very dear woman. I loved her very dearly. I'm sure most of us all love our mum dearly. She was always there wherever I was at in life. She was the only one, that unconditional love. And I just thought, I've got to do this for her, no matter what. And, you know, I took her strength. She was a very strong Scotch woman. And I took on her strength. I was like, you know what? I'm not alone here. She was a strong woman. We talk about higher power, and at that time it was like I couldn't get a better higher power. She became my higher power, and I embraced her, and I took her spirit, and you know what? And I still have that to this day. She's my higher power, and it's been an amazing. It's been amazing, you know, and I carry her spirit with me, and it was scary because I didn't know if I was going to, because it was like life or death, honestly. I was at a crossroads where if I can't do this, I don't know if I can live. I don't know if I can carry on. You know, I've just lost the most important person in my life. And the whole thought of not living life with her not in it, it was just not, it couldn't, yeah. So, and it worked, you know, a day at a time. I dug deep, I took on suggestions, I went to meetings, I went to Narcotics Anonymous, and I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I dug deep and I got into the middle of the fellowship. I was suggested, not told, but suggested, if you want to stay clean and sober, take on these suggestions. And I took on those suggestions. I got a sponsor, I did commitments, I did lots of meetings, I walked to meetings, I cycled to meetings, I went all over the country, eventually all over the world to meetings. And it's been absolutely amazingly life-changing. It's gave me a life beyond any imagination I could ever imagine. And just getting in touch with myself on a level of consciousness that I'd never expect. It's been so powerful. The journey is continuing. You know,
I think it's an ongoing journey, isn't
ongoing,
it? I mean, that level of consciousness that you just mentioned
ongoing,
is really, for me, was, you know, I like yourself, you know, I started to change and I started to develop, and I went out in business, and I know you've done the same, and we'll talk about that because that's such a powerful example of repurposing, you know, all of that stuff that you had, all of that essence that you had, that entrepreneurial side, you know, your energy, your ADHD, you know, that energy. I mean, I took all of that stuff and, you know, for different reasons, really, to provide for a family and stuff like that. You know, I took all that and repurposed that into a positive, honest way to live, etc., etc., and you know, and done very well. But, you know, it was later on in my journey, although I was healing, it wasn't till later on in my journey, you know, maybe sort of 12, 13 years ago, that I really, you know, went on a much deeper journey. And that's when things really started to change for me in a deeper spiritual way. So, you know, getting back to starting out that journey and that consciousness, it's not like you stop using drink and drugs and then you become conscious, you know. You stop using drink and drugs and you become conscious of all the gear that you're carrying with you, all the baggage and the wreckage. So, I mean, that's really where the work starts, in my eyes, of change and really that journey kind of home, really, which people mention. And it probably looks different for everyone, you know. But
I mean, the journey started back, Steve, in, you know, Oxford. The seed was planted there, and all the various other institutions I went into, you know, the rehab setups, they had different strategies, and I always took something from all of them, and put it back into my tool bag when I landed in the fellowship of AA and NA. That the tools were there. I just needed to sharp up some. I needed to get some new ones and find different ones what worked or don't work. And it's been like, you know, it was the whole... I had run for many, many years from the East End with lots of shame and lots of, you know, I can't go down there because I've done this, or, you know, it just... And then I went right back to the core. I went back to my mum's home. I slept in her bed and I got recovery. And that was part of my grieving process as well, you know. And I had an amazing spiritual experience, which I won't go into, but it was very powerful. I eventually had to go to work, and it was like scary because, you know, my image, this image that I created, this persona, that I was something, and I was who I am, and it's like I was you know, I was at the end just a messed up, drunk junkie, and here I was now trying to create a new life, and I had to really dig deep, and take on them suggestions, because my head would tell me one thing, but my heart was telling me another thing. And I went with what my heart was telling me and tried to just not let the head take control, because as we know, the head can tell us lots of unnecessary negative thinking and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
And just go into the place of, you know, getting, you know, I went into another little day treatment centre. I got into the rooms and I never had to go on any, you know, withdrawal symptoms. I got clean in the rooms. I let go of the heavy drugs I was on. I didn't need to go into detox, and it was suggested, you can do it here, Rob. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do it here. And I did it there. And I went right back to where I've been running away for all them years. And I did it there. And I had family members in the area, in the flats, who were using up to no good, and friends, and it didn't matter, because I'd surrendered. And there was a fella who's still around. He said to me, get step 1, 2, 3, read that book out loud, because it works. Read it out loud. And when I'm vulnerable, which I'm able to go to that vulnerable place, I do that. And I did that. And I got on my hands and knees. It was suggested, get on your hands and knees, pray, Rob, you need to go deep. And I did that, I took it on. And, you know, I had an experience back many years ago in Her Majesty's Pleasure. And I turned to God. I had an experience. And I was very vulnerable at the time. And I turned Christian for 6 months while I was in there. And it was one of the most powerful experiences as a young man. It was so empowering. So when it came to surrendering and picking up step 1, 2, 3, it came naturally. I didn't have to struggle with the whole concept of what is God. I have my own understanding of God today. It's a little bit different to what it was back then in Christianity and Jesus. I feel different about it today.
So, I mean, just for obviously, there's a lot of listeners to this podcast, and many of them are not recovery-based people. So, just for those listeners, the steps that you're referring to, 1, 2, and 3, are from the program originating from Alcoholics Anonymous. And step 1 is we admitted we were powerless. The original version is over alcohol. Yeah. In the Narcotics Anonymous version, and other versions, it's we admitted we were powerless over our addiction. Step 2 is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves would restore us to sanity. Yes. And step 3 is we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. So they're the steps that you're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for pointing that out there, Steve, because when I did surrender, it was just like naturally they just came into play. And it worked. It was like, it was not a struggle. So I kind of surrendered the way of living, and I needed to move on, and which I did move on. Yeah. And the power of that has never left me, because, I got 5 hours sleep after being around for 5 days of withdrawals. As, getting that was a miracle. Yeah. It was like I was given a gift to have some rest so I could then march back on and stay here and not feel like I need to go back and get something to make me feel, a bit well. And I stayed, and I got a sponsor within 6 months, and I got a little job within 9 months, £30 a day, and that job was a little labouring job, and then I went on to work with a very dear friend today in recovery. And I've never looked back. I kind of, when I stopped, I wanted a quality of life. We're here having a quality of life and, living a healthy life. But I like having a choice. And I know from my past life that I tried to, always have more money than I ever needed, because I liked the choice it gave me. I could do things, I could buy things, I could travel, it just gave me a lot of choice. Yeah. So I now wanted to create a way of making healthy money and a career. And I worked hard. I don't know how it was going to happen, because I had daily struggles as well, thinking, is this what my life's come to? I was walking out in the morning with some dirty old clothes, going to work £30 a day. And it was really, it's powerful to say this, because for the first 18 months, I struggled mentally and feeling like I was going out there, feeling like, what has happened?
So in that mental struggle, was it your image of your previous
absolutely.
image?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's really, interesting how powerful that ego.
Yeah, the ego
Because, you
and
know,
the pride.
what you'd been describing, and we'll go back to this, you said you started changing and listening to the heart and not the head. And you know, I view that as, you know, maybe the heart is the intuitive part of ourselves. The head can definitely be the egoic part of ourselves playing out. And, you know, it's interesting that being in that space, in that head space, and having that constant like argument of, you know, what am I doing here? What does it look like to other people? What does it look like to me? Where's my sense of purpose, my sense of being? You know, I mean, that's a battle between ego, and that's a battle between, you know, intuition, which is now telling you, yeah, look, you know, this is the way to go forward. And obviously, the support of groups, fellowships, or whatever they are, just having healthy places that you can go and talk to people and get reflection is just so powerful. But, you know, it's really succinct that, you know, you're talking about that battle of like you're changing your purpose in life. You're doing something worthwhile. Okay, you're only getting 30 quid a day doing it.
Oh no, but it was great. You know, for me, it was like, you know, I was so happy. You know, and I'd had a lot of money. And yeah, I was happy, and it wasn't about. I had structure. I was getting up. I was going to work. I was doing it correct. I was doing the right thing, and I felt happy within myself. Even though I was struggling with the whole ego, that what happened to Rob? Gee, Rob, you used to think you was this, you was that, and you was going here. You know, I lived a lot. Other thing that's really important to say, I lived in a lot of fantasy. There was a lot of fantasy within my world, in that way where I came from.
Well, that's a coping mechanism to not be present, isn't
absolutely.
it? Really? Yeah.
And fantasy that I'm going here, I'm going to go there, and visualise stuff, and some of it came true.
Well, it's manifestation, isn't it? It's different,
But so here I was now, trying to recreate who am I, or find out who I was, and discovering who I am, and then recreating a career, or trying to create a career, and having that sort of struggle with, you know, the ego. And it passed. As I've discovered, everything does pass.
Yeah.
And, you know, I discovered doing the work, inside job stuff, things will pass. It won't always feel like this.
And the work, you know, obviously people perceive that differently. And I know you're involved in a lot of men's work. You've done a lot of work around the ADHD, a lot of training and stuff like that. But I think the work that, you know, when we talk about the work in them terms, the work is like, you know, just changing the character that become established.
Well, looking at oneself.
And
going in. So, you know, on that note, I mean, you know, we have, as you said earlier, the steps 1, 2, 3, you know, working the steps, working with a sponsor, and going into whether it be counselling, therapy, you know, going off doing different men's stuff, you know, some very powerful stuff in men's work. Going to ashrams in India, you know, yoga, just kind of self-discovery, and going inside, looking, because I've always been externally, everything's been outside. So to have the ability to go in there and use some of those tools and go inside and look at myself, and some of that stuff I've looked at is not very comfortable, you know, and it makes me feel, it still can make me feel uncomfortable, but I come to accept I am who I am. And also come to love myself as who I am, you know, and I walk with my head high. I love myself, you know, early days, there was little tools I was given that was, you know, it's really important.
Yeah.
It's really important to be able to kind of, you know, nurture yourself, because there's that little Rob needs some love, my inner child. Here I was, you know, this whole new life. And it's just, because I did feel like a little kid sometimes. I was relearning, finding out what I like and what I don't.
In that journey to finding your inner child, I mean, if say we were starting at, what age was you when you got sober and clean?
30.
30, okay, till really being able to embrace and hold that child within you and allow yourself that. So, you know, from that point, you said there's a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of stuff that you've got to get through. What's this kind of time frame on that? I know it's ongoing.
Yeah. What, in terms of finding that inner child?
Yeah, I mean, What's the...
It's a difficult one. I mean, I had an experience 5 years in India, and that was very powerful.
Yeah.
I did some retreat stuff in an ashram, and I was in 10 days silence. And
Vipassana.
yeah, I was in 10 days silence, and I came out, and I went into one of the meditation centres, and it was called Kundalini. It was a dance meditation. And all of a sudden, I had little Rob come out in front of me. Now, this might sound crazy to some of the listeners, but this was my experience, and it was very powerful. And it's never left me, and it's opened me up to other stuff. I had this little child out in front of me dancing, and it was like, wow, just mind-blowing. Dancing in front of me, and I was just like, wow. I was freed. I was freed up. And I was trying to relive that moment for a few days after, and I was speaking to one of the facilitators in the ashram, and they said, look, you had the moment, you had it, you enjoyed it, move on.
But I think it's a beautiful moment, it's a powerful moment, and I really like the visualisation of that, because I experienced the same thing after going on my own journey and seeing a reflection in the mirror of seeing who I should have been, but in the reflection was that child, and it was just like, yeah. And then the work started for me of learning to be with that part of me, to reintegrate that part of me, because in that part of me, for me, was the vulnerability, was the sensitivity, was all the aspects that I couldn't live with and had kind of cut off from and disassociated with. So it's really interesting that, you know, that you've been told, you've had the moment, that's it, move on.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, moving on is like, you know, that's like the practice of life is to like honour this part of me, and I've danced with the child. Funny enough, first time I ever went to an ecstatic dance, you know, I hadn't had that experience of the embodiment of that child for you know, probably quite a few years, but then all of a sudden in this ecstatic dance, I went on this internal journey, and I was dancing with that child, and I was dancing, and tears were coming down my eyes, and it's just such a powerful moment. But the discovery and that embodiment, that connection of that child is such a powerful thing. But then, you know, what's been your process of honouring that, or literally did you just put it to bed?
No. You know, I still have that. I still have, you know, the self-discovery and finding out, you know, more about, you know, Rob within. It's been just never ending, and it continues. You know, in pandemic, I did a ADHD diagnosis. And no surprise, obviously, I had it because all the traits were there. And for me, it was no big thing. It was like, hey, don't really want to go there. You know, I just need to highlight that I got married as well. I have a beautiful wife. I met travelling the world. We met in Thailand, Danish, and we got 2 beautiful children. And that's through me changing. You know, I would never have that. I would never have had that if I was still living that way of life. I don't believe so. And, you know, my children also, it was highlighted they've got ADHD, which reflected back to me.
Right.
And I did a diagnosis, and I wanted to know more. I didn't want to know, bizarrely, I didn't want to know for myself, but it was about the children. I wanted to know what they was going through. And I then went and done an ADHD diploma in mentoring and coaching, life coaching. And it was a missing puzzle, because all of a sudden everything made sense. I've been soul searching, you know, looking inside myself, doing all these different self-help, you know, but something still was missing. And all of a sudden I discovered I got ADHD. It was like the penny dropped. That makes sense. Now I started tethering back to different parts of my life, and things started making sense. Why I behaved the way I did. High risk taker. It's love being on the edge. You know, real, like, you know, just love, just a real talker, love storytelling. You know, just so many things made sense. And it was like, wow. And, you know, for the last few years I've been looking at, you know, working with ADHD, looking at sort of discovering more about, you know, what goes on with ADHD, and it's very powerful. It's a superpower. I mean, you know, going back again, that from that labourer, I then went on the journey of, you know, being a labourer, to be a painter, to be a plasterer. I had a very good friend who sort of showed me a few bits about the building game, and I went on, and then ended up running a very big, successful company. And the drive and determination from the ADHD, I now know, because I would be on site at 6 in the morning, I'll be on site at 8 at night. I got obsessed. I lived, breathed and eat it until we become successful. And I'm like that with a lot of things. You know, when I want to make something happen, I have to really smother it. And when I smother it, I make it happen.
Is that, I mean, obviously in achieving stuff, there's a real power to that, and I've been on that journey myself, and that you've become like yourself, quite successful, and yeah, I mean that took a lot of stuff out of me as well. I mean,
absolutely.
It was giving me, but
it does. It has the reverse effect. Of course,
yeah,
it can have the reverse effect where it drains the life out of you.
Drains the life out of you. You lose connection with your family.
Absolutely, which happened. But there's which is a part, but controlling that superpower, you know, is that when there's something that I find interesting and I like, I will put 150% in energy into it. And, you know, I'm a lot more aware today. I've got a lot more conscious today about how I operate and how much energy, you know, because I've stepped back in a lot of areas and gone, well, I don't need to put that.
So you know, part of that healing and part of that self-love is to regulate how much.
Yeah, and manage it a lot better.
And manage it,
and manage it, and just not be over smothering. Like I say, smothered it. It's like, you know, I had to do that because I didn't know. Yeah. So I had to overdo it
part of the
to
learning.
to get it to where I need to get it to. Yeah. Maybe someone who's like got various qualifications and worked really hard to, you know, they don't have to maybe put as much energy in.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, our path is our path.
Yeah, that's right. But with me, I've had to sort of overdo it to make sure I get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't just put minimal time in and get the right result. I have to overdo it. But I had to, but not so much I do that today. I've eased off a lot and it's a lot more manageable. But yeah, so I hope I'm making sense there about that.
I mean, that does make sense, and it's and a really interesting point of the conversation, I think, is not just the content, but is the fact that, you know, it's a continuous learning. And you know, I know we're speaking about you've been to that place of big business. You're trying to kind of now move into something else of, you know, the ADHD world of bringing your lived experience, bringing your you know, your learned experience of your qualifications to being of service. And
absolutely, yeah. And I want to give, you know, one of my main aims today would be the energy I put into the successful business. I'd like to put, it's not going to be the same energy, but the similar energy into hopefully reaching out and helping others who have come from the similar background, don't have to come from the same background, but similar background. Obviously, it's different today from what it was like when we was kids. There's different setups out there now. Yeah. You know, phones are a problem. Social media is a problem. There's lots of different other issues and problems.
Other places to get lost.
Absolutely. It ain't just necessarily drink and drugs. You know, there's other setups that people get caught up in. But I would like to be able to share my experience. And hopefully, if I can help others, I'll certainly be there to do that. That's my aim. And with, I mean, solely on ADHD, because that's my main aim. Yeah. Because I really believe that unless you've been there and understand it and know it, you've got no idea.
Well, yeah.
You know, look, for years, I always put, that's a label, that's this and that's that. But as I've grown, when I see two children struggling from young, and thinking, wow, and then getting diagnosed myself and then doing the diploma, I mean, it was just mind-blowing. Yeah. And it's like, wow, this is real, and it's very powerful. And there's a lot of people certainly younger, who there's stigma and shame and they don't want to talk about it or don't want to look at it. But, you know, it's okay to have, you know, if you've got this, it's okay.
Well, it's really useful to be aware that, you know, and tap into support for this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And they don't need to be alone with it,
Yeah.
because it's very powerful in the mind. We have racy brains. We go through all sorts of, like, you know, there's wonderful things and there's negative things. And as I said earlier, there's some high risk taking with it. You know, there's self-harming, there's lots of different things. And I feel, you know, even if I can help one person, that's a great achievement.
Well, I think just, you know, having this conversation and kind of explaining, obviously, it doesn't explain everything, but it's certainly a big piece of the puzzle that run throughout, you know, your experience of life and how you've, you know, learned to kind of to be with that and to not, you know, it's not like something that you need to get rid of. It's a superpower. You've described it as a superpower.
I embrace it and I'm proud of it. I mean, I really, when I speak, you know, for many years, I was very guarded around my addiction and where I've come from, because there's lots of different judgments on it. And especially having a young family, I was very protective of not wanting to sort of put my children at a place where they felt, oh, their dad was this or that.
Yeah.
So now I feel a lot more comfortable. They've grown up a bit. I'm okay to expose that about me now. And there's the same with the ADHD, but I've embraced the ADHD a lot more in being able to kind of work with it than sort of going in society. There's still a lot of stigma around alcoholism and drug addiction, you know, especially criminal activity as well. So you have to be careful who you talk to about that stuff, you know. But the ADHD, I feel very comfortable talking about anyone with that.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it's a lot more acceptable, certainly from adults. But the younger generation, you know, because there's a lot of pressure socially, you know, I feel there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of making it okay to accept.
How's that going to look? What are you going to do, Rob? What's your kind of, I mean,
well, yeah.
You know, how are you going to move forward with
well,
this?
I'm looking at the moment, I'm doing some coaching. Because I've been in construction for a few years, I've not completely let go of it. It pays the bills, and I still do a little bit, but I'm looking to tether across to more coaching and possibly get involved with some others and maybe doing some stuff what you're doing like here, Steve, but around ADHD podcast.
Brilliant.
And, you know, let it organically grow where it goes. You know, you know, whether it be going into schools, talking to school kids, whether it be going out to a bigger audience and talking about, you know, trying to give support and, you know, have onward support, you know. So it's not just giving them something and then leaving them with it, you know, creating, you know, there's talk of doing some, you know, I've got some friends in the US who are doing sort of ADHD retreats, which is really interesting because you get people all like-minded come together and check in. I mean, when I did the diploma, it was really, really fascinating to sit with a load of people with ADHD. It was like really mind-blowing because it was like a mirror. Yeah. It was like, wow, God, mate, they're like me. I can't believe it. I never got that before. Yeah. And it was really mind-blowing. So coming together collectively, a bunch of people who have got a similar, I wouldn't say condition, but the same sort of, you know, thing going on for them in their mind is, you know, really great because you can become creative, you can talk about ideas, you can, you know, you're not alone with it.
And it's really, it sounds like it's about, you know, enhancing that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Grabbing hold of that and taking that, you know.
It's making it okay.
Understanding what parts serve you, what parts maybe don't serve you so well, and then, as you say, managing all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so
powerful, mate.
Yeah, very powerful. And I mean, I think the journey going forward, I mean, I just will go with it and whatever, you know, and that's been, you know, the freeing thing about changing the way my mind, my thinking, and, you know, going with things and not trying to over control it, that it's got to be a certain way and trying to enjoy the journey. So from here to whatever happens, you know, enjoying that and not just trying to get to the destination. and thinking, I've got the prize, that's it. And I missed the moment, the journey.
It's such a valuable place to
that,
leave this,
yeah.
really. It's, enjoying the journey and
Yeah.
and honouring the journey. And it's been, really interesting chatting, mate. It's really been good. Have you got any, I know you're not even on, are you even on social media or anything at the moment?
No, I'm not on social media. I've got a website, and I've got...
you got a website, brilliant.
Yeah, I've got a ADHD website, and I've got a little, email. But what I'll do, Steve, I won't put it out there now,
Okay.
but I'm sure if anyone was interested,
if
I'll give it to you and you can put it out there. But I've got a website and I've got an email address, and if anyone was interested in looking further around ADHD, I'd be more than happy to speak to them.
What I'll do is I'll put the link to the website on the notes of this
Yeah.
when this podcast goes out. So,
Please, yeah.
people can then contact you if they're interested in.
And I'm just looking at some stuff at the moment, so I'm definitely going to be doing some stuff around ADHD. If there is anyone who's interested, please
reach out.
check in.
I mean, come through me and I can put
absolutely.
you in touch with Robert.
Lovely.
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's just a really exciting time, and it's great to kind of be at this point, having this conversation where, I know you've kind of put a lot of energy into life, and you've come from where you come from, done very well, been very successful in business, and now to move that energy into something that aligns with you, with what you feel valued, and your experience, and it would be great, to see if this podcast manifests. I think it's a great idea. I think it will be, you'll instantly have quite a big audience there. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this journey continues for you, Rob.
Thank you.
Lots of love, my friend.
God bless.
Cheers.
Thank you very much, Steve. Cheers.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
See you, mate.